2:41 in the afternoon, the Arabian Sea, USS Nimitz was 3 hours into a routine flight deck cycle. Music. When the first ballistic missile warning flashed across the screens in the Combat Direction Center. The carrier strike group had been operating under electronic emission control for 12 hours, attempting to remain a ghost in the vast, music blue expanse of the northern Indian Ocean. Something in the intelligence picture had shifted without warning. The air on the flight deck was heavy and humid, smelling of JP-5 jet fuel and the sharp salt spray of the Arabian Sea. In less than 90 seconds, the professional rhythm of a 40-year-old music supercarrier would be shattered by a kinetic impact that would challenge every damage control protocol in the United States Navy. The first indication of the threat came, music from the cruiser CG-67, the USS Shiloh, acting as the primary air defense commander. Music for the strike group. The ANPY-1 radar caught a high-altitude contact rising from a mobile launcher near the Iranian coast, screaming into the upper atmosphere on a ballistic trajectory. Music. It was a CARS anti-ship ballistic missile, a weapon designed for one specific purpose, to kill a carrier. On the bridge of the USS Nimitz, the commanding officer ordered an immediate emergency turn to port. The 4 massive propellers pushing the 97,000-ton ship to its maximum speed of 30 knots. The defense was instantaneous but compressed by time. The USS Shiloh launched 2 Standard Missile-6 interceptors, the white plumes of their rocket motors carving streaks across the hazy afternoon sky. The first interceptor missed by less than 10 meters as the Iranian missile performed a terminal maneuver, its guidance system locking onto the massive radar signature of the carrier's hull. The second interceptor's proximity, music, fused, detonated, shredding the missile's control fins, but the momentum of the weapon was already set. Music. It was a falling anvil of steel and high explosives, moving at 4 times the speed of sound. The impact was not a sound at first, but a physical compression of the atmosphere that threw every sailor on the flight deck to the non-skid surface. The missile struck the music aft section of the flight deck, just behind the island and forward of the number 3 elevator. The kinetic energy of the impact punched a hole through 4 inches of hardened steel deck plating as if it were parchment paper. A split second later, the 500 pounds high explosive warhead detonated in the ceiling of the hangar bay. A fireball of orange and oily black smoke erupted from the puncture point, rising 50 m into the air. Below the deck, the blast wave tore through the overhead piping, music, and electrical conduits, instantly severing the primary fire main for the aft third of the ship. 2 FA-18 Super Hornet fighters parked near the impact point were tossed like toys. Music. One was blown clean over the side of the ship, while the other was crumpled into a mass of burning aluminum and leaking fuel. The ship did not just shudder, it groaned. The force of the explosion and the sudden intake of thousands of tons of cedar through a ruptured cooling intake caused the ship to heel violently to the right. Sailors in the galley and deep in the engineering spaces were thrown against bulkheads as the deck began to tilt. The inclinometer on the bridge swung past 3 degrees, then 5. It finally settled at a hard, terrifying 7 degrees list to the music starboard side. On the flight deck, the silence that followed the explosion lasted only 3 seconds before the ship's general quarters alarm began its rhythmic, mournful pulse. The electronic gong sounded throughout the 1,100-foot length of the vessel, followed by the steady voice of the boat's swain's mate of the watch announcing, "General quarters, general quarters. All hands man your battle stations. This is not a drill." Black smoke began to pour from the hangar bay openings, thick and toxic with the smell of burning rubber and jet fuel. The list made music, every movement difficult. Sailors had to pull themselves along the railings of the ladders as they raced to their damage control lockers. In the Combat Direction Center, the lights flickered and shifted to emergency red as the ship's listing affected the cooling systems for the main computer banks. The tactical picture was chaotic. The USS Nimitz was wounded. Its flight deck was fouled by a massive hole and burning wreckage. It was leaning into the sea while still in the heart of the enemy's engagement zone. The commanding officer gripped the edge of the bridge console, his boots finding purchase on the tilted deck. Music. He looked out at the burning remains of the number 3 elevator and the dark smoke billowing toward the horizon. The carrier was no longer the hunter. It was a target that was slowly taking on water in the middle of a combat zone. The question was no longer about projecting power, but about whether the crew could save the ship before the next wave of missiles arrived. 2:46 in the afternoon, the hangar bay of the USS Nimitz. Damage Control Party 17 struggled to move up the 7 degrees incline of the deck, their heavy boots slipping on a lethal mixture of seawater, hydraulic fluid, and jet fuel. The air in the cavernous space was no longer breathable. Music. It was a thick, swirling vortex of black smoke and vaporized metal that obscured everything beyond 5M. The only light came from the dancing orange glow of the fires reflecting off the bulkhead and the flickering red beams of emergency lanterns. Every sailor was encased in heavy, fire-resistant flash gear, their faces hidden behind the masks of self-contained breathing apparatuses. The rhythmic mechanical hissing of their respirators was the only sound that competed with the roar of the fire. The impact of the Iranian missile had turned the aft hangar bay into a slaughterhouse of machinery. One aircraft, an EA-18 Music Gulf Growler, had been slammed against the starboard bulkhead by the blast wave. Its fuselage snapped in two and its cockpit canopy shattered. Fuel was pouring from its ruptured wing tanks, feeding a river of fire, music, that was crawling toward the center of the ship. The temperature in the compartment was rising toward 400 degrees, causing the paint on the overhead to blister and peel away in large black flakes. The damage control assistant, a lieutenant commander stationed in the secondary damage control central, Music, watched the status board with grim intensity. The 7 degrees list was the primary threat. If the water continued to pour into the lower decks through the ruptured cooling intakes and the holes in the flight deck, the ship would lose its stability entirely. He keyed his radio, his voice sounding metallic and tight. Bridge Damage Control Central. We have a massive rupture in the fire main on the 4th deck. Frames 200 through 220. We are losing pressure to the aft aqueous film forming, Music foam stations. I need all available hands to the hangar bay for manual fire suppression. On the deck, the sailors of Party 17 finally reached the primary, Music, fire plug. They struggled to connect the heavy 4 inches hoses, their hands shaking from the adrenaline and the intense heat. The list made every movement a battle against gravity.